Your point to the House. P. Wishart.
Thank you very much, Mr Crosbie, and it's of course a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman, the Chair of the Public Accounts and Constitution Committee, and can I commend him for his very thoughtful speech and the way that his committee has gone sensitively around some of these issues. And where we've seen the interim report, I look forward to the full conclusions, and I know that with the honourable member, the member for Inverclyde, on his committee, he's got more than able deputies to back him up in the work that he's been doing. Mr Crosbie, I rise to support the amendments in the names of my honourable friends, and also in the names of the members who variously have put forward the amendments on behalf of the Scottish and Welsh Government. And I think this is the key point to be making in all of this, that where we're going with all this requires cross-party attention, support and consensus, but also cross-institution support. And I think the efforts that have gone to try and resolve some of the difficulties around Clause 11 are going to be noted, and the efforts that have been made, not just in this House, but also the committees, I'll give them credit, in the other place, and also across the Scottish Parliament, have got to be noted. And I think that we are starting to see progress when it comes to a conclusion to some of these conversations and discussion, though this debate tonight really helps us move these things on. And I want to come to some of the main points of all this. But just in a bit of context, Mr Crosbie, and I think we have to acknowledge that Clause 11 is flawed. It doesn't work. It's unsustainable when it comes to being in line with what we understand about the devolution process or devolution settlement. It has to be amended, and I think there's very few people in this House who get to their feet and try to defend Clause 11 because it is suitably unworkable and it does not respect what we understand as the principles of devolution. In fact, what it actually does is turn the central principles and tenets of devolution on its head. It drives a coach and horses through everything that we understand about the devolution settlement. And the central tenet of devolution is really, really straightforward and simple. And it's the basic concept that if it's not listed as reserved, it's presumed to be devolved. And that's been the founding principle of devolution way before the Scotland Act. It goes back to the days of the Scottish Constitutional Convention. In fact, it goes back, even further back, to the days before Donald Dewar was even knee-high to a parliamentary grasshopper. That's how far back that goes in our institutional memory when it comes to issues around devolution. Yes, of course.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving me. Will he agree with me that the danger of Clause 11 is that it seeks to replace Scotland's relationship with the EU with Scotland's relationship with the UK? And it's important for the government to set the tone and how it intends to proceed on an equal basis between the governments and devolved nation.
The honourable gentleman is of course absolutely right, and these are some of the issues I want to turn to in the course of my contribution. Very spot on. There is an imbalance about how all this has been repatriated, and the repatriation of these powers is a central feature that we have concerns about, and that's the very points I want to come to. But I want to talk a little bit just more about the devolution settlement, because I actually believe the way they designed devolution is almost inspired. It's a very elegant solution to approach devolution in an asymmetric way. With the devolution we have in this country is asymmetric. There's different powers to all the different parliaments and assemblies, and we are a very complex constitutional nation across the United Kingdom. And the way that we've designed devolution meets the demands of a complex nation, of a multi-nation United Kingdom like we have in place. So we therefore muck around with the basic premises and principles of devolution at our peril. And that is why Clause 11 presents such a clear danger and threat to that it must be amended. I also want to say something else about the context of all this, and I think it's important that this is said. Scotland did not vote to leave the European Union. Every single local authority area in Scotland voted to remain in the European Union. I now have constituents of mine who are overly concerned about the chaotic cluelessness that's at the heart of the negotiations and discussions about taking this country out of the European Union. And what's happened with all these conversations and discussion is that the Scottish Parliament has become collateral in all of this, where there's a real concern about how our Parliament will operate and the powers it has the right to expect and also to progress with. Yes, of course I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Agree that the secret of what the government's thinking on this bill is in the fact that they're insisting on putting a date for withdrawal from Europe on the bill, but they refuse to put a sunset clause to give us a date when the powers that they're about to grab from Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland will be repatriated.
a very important and good point, because that's the sort of thing that we really need to see. That's the sort of thing that would give confidence to him and myself, other than just naming the day that we're leaving the European Union, something that we're all quite familiar with anyway. But I also want to talk just a little bit about what's happened today, because I think it's quite important that we set the context for this debate. And when we look at Northern Ireland, we have to sort of see that in the context of the devolutionary powers. And we saw today a situation where we believed that we had some sort of solution to where we were going with the Northern Irish question. There was an agreement. The Prime Minister of Northern Ireland was prepared to get to his feet and say that a solution had been delivered and garnered, only for that to be knocked out of the water by a telephone conversation with Arlene Foster. That is where some of these issues about devolution have gone. Now, we've got this very elegant phrase, and I never heard of this today. This was regulatory divergence. I think that is a fantastic phrase that I want to hear more of, because I think this is, if it sort of works for Northern Ireland, I'm sort of thinking this regulatory divergence could just about work for Scotland, given the range of powers we have in the Scottish Parliament and the legislative competence we have in a whole swathe of areas. So let's hear more about this regulatory divergence. And I'm disappointed that none of my DUP friends are in, who could have talked a little bit more to me about some of the concerns that they might have about this. Because the last thing that we need in the Scottish Parliament is to be sucked into all this process when it comes out. So it's now incumbent upon this government to ensure that devolution continues to operate on the basic premises set out in the 99 Act. And I think the sooner we get some sort of reassurance that that's their view and they bring forward considered amendments, I think we will be happier. But it starts with this Clause 11. Now, I listened very carefully to the Honourable Member for Harwich, and I looked at his committee's report and I saw the witnesses he brought forward. I was quite surprised that he referenced Nigel Smith, but I think in my committee, we looked at this issue too, and we had a whole variety of different witnesses. And I think the Lord's Constitution Committee and the Scottish Parliament committees looked at this. It's very hard to find anybody with an expertise in constitutional politics in any sort of either the legal frameworks or just an academic interest who doesn't agree that Clause 11 doesn't work and is in need of amendments. Indeed, of all the guests I think that have been in front of all our various committees to deal with all these things, it's really difficult, and I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for finding one of somebody who would actually support the government's position when it comes to this. And there's also the very basic understanding that we've got to have that the Scottish Government has stated that if Clause 11 proceeds as currently constituted, it will not be in a position to recommend a legislative consent motion, leading to, at the very least, a constitutional standoff, which is singularly unnecessary and helpful, and of course gets in the way of all the other issues that this government has to deal with in this Brexit mess. The last thing it surely wants is to get into some constitutional standoff with the Scottish Government about this. Much better, because I know the progress has been made, I know there's not much difference when it comes to some of these things. Fix it, for goodness sake. Just get it sorted if it's so close to doing this. Accept these amendments as a way forward, and we could all get relaxed and happy about the fact that there won't be any sort of constitutional issue when it comes to all this. And I think the Minister really needs to say that we're going to be doing this. And it's also good to have a look at what's actually been included in the rest of this bill, particularly around Clause 11. And let's start with something that Clause 11 doesn't do. And I think we have to be really, really clear about this, because what Clause 11 doesn't do is return powers from the EU to the devolved administrations. Instead, it returns powers within the devolved competencies is solely and exclusively to the UK Government and Parliament. But worse than that, beyond that, it imposes new restrictions on how the Scottish Parliament can operate when it comes to these devolved competencies. It's a double hit that the Scottish Parliament and Government takes when it comes to these issues. It would give the UK Government power to legislate in relation to policy areas which are the responsibility of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government. And there's another issue which has not been touched on today. At the point where we leave the European Union, all these powers are repatriated to the UK Government to some form of redistributive system, which we're not really clear about how that works, and it's not really been stated about how that will operate. But at the point where we leave the European Union will of course continue to amend and legislate in these areas. And the UK Government will be legislating in these areas on behalf of the Scottish Government. So there'll be a space in between from the point where we leave, where there's a divergence between EU law and UK retained law. law, which this government solely and exclusively fit. So not only will the UK government have powers on retain law when we leave the European Union, it will have ongoing responsibilities as we continue to make that journey from leaving the EU in order to try and fulfil that gap in between. And we now know, of course, that it's a... Yes, of course, I could wait.
Can I congratulate Donald Gentleman? I think he's actually making a very positive contribution to this debate compared with the speech we heard earlier from the leader of the SNP. In the very worthy report that the Honourable Gentleman's Committee produced, which I think was a huge contribution to the establishment of common ground. It says, we recommend that the UK Government agrees with the devolved administrations what areas should be subject to common frameworks and which ones can be devolved. Isn't that exactly what is... Isn't that what's going on? And isn't this the common ground that you're seeking for and that we're seeking for, so we can get this process to move?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, and of course, we looked at these issues and we considered them very seriously, and I think there's a number of things, and hopefully the Scottish Affairs Committee report makes some sort of contribution to addressing some of these issues. But the key point that he makes, the thing that we've got to start to get to when it comes to agreeing issues around common frameworks, is they have to be agreed by the Scottish Government and Parliament before they can be progressed. This idea that somehow that frameworks can be imposed upon devolved institutions, assemblies and parliaments is something that is unsustainable and cannot be operated. And I think that's the thing that gets... I'll make progress if you don't mind, because I'll come to the Scottish Committee report and I'll let the Honourable Gentleman come in. So this is the key point when it comes to this. Agreed, consented to before progressing. And this is the thing that we have to get in place in order that we start to go forward when it comes to this sort of thing. But there's other issues when it comes to this. And when it comes... I've given me the Honourable Gentleman. I know there's lots of people coming. I know he's going to get a chance himself. And he could come back to that and we can have a conversation about this. And there's another thing that Clause 11 does. And what it does is to change the fundamental dynamic between the Scottish Parliament and this House. Because what happens with Clause 11 is the UK assumes a role as the master and repository of all retained EU legislation in devolved areas. And for the first time, as I said to the Honourable Member for Harwich, was deep in conversation with his right honourable friend, is that this creates for the first time an hierarchical version of devolution, something that Alan Page has said in the work that he did on behalf of the Scottish Government. This House will face absolutely no restriction in how it may want to operate when it comes to the areas of devolved competencies, but the Scottish Parliament will face these restrictions. It's a sort of Know Your Place Scotland, where this House is asserting its sovereignty on the Scottish Parliament. And this isn't good enough, because we've had a conversation and discussion among several members about sovereignty and our different understanding and approaches to this culturally when it comes to the idea of sovereignty. This House obviously takes the view that parliamentary sovereignty is what it's all about, where we take almost the exact view where it's about sovereignty of the people and the claim of right of the Scottish people to assert their sovereignty when it comes to these issues. So this idea of a Know Your Place Scotland when it comes to these things is... I've given weight the Honourable and I want to make some progress. So in large swathes of devolved competencies, we will be subject to UK frameworks determined and controlled by the UK Government. And will never be satisfactory to anybody who works and anybody who's a devolved parliamentarian in any of our devolved structures. I'm going to try and make it simple to the Brexiteers here, and there are not very many in the House where I'm looking round, and it's quite strange that we're looking round and it's mainly Remain type, so I don't know who to pick on. I'm trying desperately to see who it could be. Oh yes, the member for Aberdeen South will do. So I'm going to try and make it simple in the words that the member for Aberdeen South might try to use when it comes to try and get an understanding of what this. And it's like Scotland is giving up its place in the European Union as part of the United Kingdom to join a UK superstate. That's what it is like. But this superstate doesn't seem to be as benign as the European Parliament. And, you know, like this British superstate would make Scotland... Their jaundiced view, the EU look like a benign, cuddly, receptive institution of enlightenment, such as the UK superstate that we are expected to be part of. And I'm grateful to my member for Gilligan and Yar for that analogy, though I see he's not in his place, and hopefully he'll join us later on for his words. And I've given way to the Honourable Gentleman, if he doesn't mind. Because this is a UK superstate which seeks to control and restrict the operation of Scotland. And this UK superstate is prepared to strip us of powers faster than any UKIP cartoon version of some evil EU bureaucrat or commissioner. Now, I want to make a comparison with Ireland, because I think this is quite instructive, because Ireland, as a member of the European Union, can almost stop the progress of Brexit. It has the powers to do that, and it's actually asserted that might be something it may be obliged to seek in the last couple of weeks. In Scotland, as part of the UK superstate, we don't even have the powers to legislate for the best interests of hill farmers in Perthshire. That's going to be left to this House. That's how power-grabbing the UK superstate in this place is going to be. This is a real power grab, more menacing than any fantasy dreamt up by our Brexiteer friends in relation to their Death Star version of Brussels. Now, Mr Crosbie, they're even starting to use the words of the superstate. Our integrated UK joint economy is now the single market. The next minute, the Honourable Member for Arich will be made a UK Commissioner. We'll start to see UK Paul and we'll see UK Atom. This is the sort of place that we're going with this creation of the British superstate, and we've got to be very careful when we're designing these things. We don't want to swap our place, our useful place in Europe, to be junior and subservient members of their British superstate. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman, just to shut him up for a little bit.
Thanks, the Honourable Gentleman, for giving way to shut me up. In fact, what I want to point out is that all the things he's said for the last few minutes, which are detracting, I think, genuinely from the tone of his speech, are actually covered in the Joint Ministerial Council European Negotiations Framework, JMC Common Frameworks Definition Principles, that was published on the 16th of October 2017. It describes in detail exactly how we will go about creating these common frameworks. It's absolutely the opposite. It's a completely the opposite of what the Honourable Gentleman's saying. He's making all this up as he goes along. Very entertaining, by the way.
Grateful to the Honourable Gentleman's interventions. I always am when we come to these debates. It's just a view of the way that these things are progressing that I don't particularly recognise, and I think you'll forgive me as I go. I'll just make a bit of progress, and we'll look at some of these issues once again, because I think that I'm not going to satisfy him in these sort of things, and certainly his intervention has not reassured me in terms of the general progress that we have to make in order to try and make sure that we do this. But thankfully, Mr Crosbie, to try and get back more of a consensual tone, because I noticed the gentleman's irritation that I might just have been a tad too political in some of the remarks I was making there. But let's try and be more consensual again, because I'm looking around and I see my colleagues in the Conservative benches from the Scottish Affairs Committee, and I'm genuinely grateful for the contribution that they've made. And I think that we've designed a way forward with some of our recommendations, observations that might help to try and resolve this issue, because resolution is what's required, and I think we've all agreed that we can do this. And where our recommendations don't directly match some of the things that are included in their amendments, they're roughly in the same type of territory. I think we all agree that a framework should be agreed and not imposed. I think we're looking around, we're agreed with that one. That's good. I think we're agreed that the Scottish Government shouldn't have, in areas of devolved competencies, have that legislated on by the UK Government. I think we're agreed, and maybe not so much agreement in that one. And that genuinely disappoints me that colleagues opposite still believe that it's right for the UK Government to legislate in areas of devolved competence. I'm looking at the ministerial team, and I'm hoping they're going to reassure me that's not what they're seeking to do. No, I'm not getting that either. So we'll maybe just leave that there, Mr Crosbie. We were doing so well, and we were making that little bit of progress, but maybe that was just a step too far. So I think that might just be the difficulty that we're starting to encounter now. I'm pretty certain the ministers don't sort of share my characterisation of this process, so I'm really going to be interested to see what they say, how they could obviously describe the repatriation of devolved powers and devolved competencies going straight to the United Kingdom, instead of going to the devolved assemblies and parliaments where it should have been, then come together to agree the common frameworks in a sense of consensus, working together, all the warm, cuddly things that the Honourable Member for Harwich seems to suggest that he wants, instead of having them imposed and then given some sort of process about redistribution of orders of council and all that sort of stuff. So it's disappointing that we can't actually hear this. But there are amendments that we have. Amendments 164 and 42 remove this idea that the UK government should make sure it can consult and secure agreement from the devolved administration of the content. So that roughly matches. In fact, it matches what the Secretary of State for Scotland says. I was trying to find that quote, and it's a really good quote that he said when he came in front of the Scottish Affairs Committee, where he says a UK framework is not a framework that the UK government imposes. It's a framework that should be agreed across the United Kingdom. Now, that's the type of approach that we need to hear more of, and we need to see how that's going to be working out. And I very much support the cross-party amendments which are down in the names of the Scottish and Welsh governments, which I know are mainly in the name of the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South, and I did appreciate his remarks and comments today. We can't support Amendment 64. I'm sorry to say that to the Labour front bench, because what that actually does, and I know it's the lead amendment this evening, we won't be voting for that, we'll be abstaining on that one, because what that amendment suggests is that these frameworks should be designed by the UK government, and is not in a position where it should come together with all the devolved assemblies and parliaments. So, unfortunately, we can't go that side with them, and I hope they withdraw their amendment tonight. And I'm looking at the honourable gentleman. Withdraw it, please, because it's not helpful. And I think what we need to try and see in this House is all the parties working together. A presumption that the UK government is going to be responsible for initiating the frameworks is not acceptable to us. I don't even think it's acceptable to, and I'm looking to Welsh colleagues sitting around here, I don't even think it's acceptable to the Welsh Assembly either. So I know which the Labour Party run and operate, and I'm looking at the Honourable Member for Penarth, and he'll have to tell me if the Welsh Government are absolutely happy about the UK Government designing frame. OK, you say it is, so I'll accept that from him. Yes, I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
For giving way, does he not accept that the amendments that he's discussing do not reflect the recommendations of the Scottish Affairs Committee and go further than that committee's recommendation? So does he understand why we as Scottish Conservatives are not in a position to support those amendments? And it's not about talking Scotland down or being whipping boys for the Conservative government. It's a recognition that that is not the place where the Scottish Affairs Committee has landed at an agreeable position.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, because I said that, you know, and I said they don't directly match, but they're roughly in the same type of territory, which I think the Honourable Gentleman will agree with me where they are. But he's right, they don't. And like, I'm not going to... Yes, of course, as long as I'm hearing from the Welsh Government.
I would. He gives me more power than I currently have. He is talking about this new Clause 64. I just do wish to really refer him to the detail of it, which is subsection 3, which says Minister of the Crown shall only create these frameworks with the advice and consent of the devolved administrations. We have put that forward with the aim of securing the agreement. And this does relate to that wider discussion. It relates to the other amendments down about the Joint Ministerial Committee. I don't think we should be doing things on a UK-wide basis without the consent. Unfortunately, that's exactly what the government is doing.
Grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, he's clarified that for me. I'll just refer him to exactly what is in new Clause 64, which is Ministers of the Crown shall only create UK-wide frameworks. Now, the presumption is it's Ministers of the Crown that create. And I know it says about consent, but what this therefore leaves is the Ministers of the Crown to create these UK-wide frameworks. Not acceptable. Yes, of course I give way to my Honourable Friend.
But does he also accept that Scottish ministers and Welsh ministers are also Ministers of the Crown?
Absolutely, but that's not the intention of this particular amendment. And I think it's a shame that we've not been able to get to the position where the Scottish Government and Welsh Assembly amendments were very, very clear in their focus and direction, and they were all in the name of the Honourable Gentleman for Edinburgh South. So why the Labour front bench felt they had to come along and do this one, I'll not understand, but I'll leave it up to them. So I'll be explaining to them why we can't support this evening, and I think they understand that reason. So we'll just really leave it at that, I think. And can I lastly just maybe turn to my Scottish Conservative colleagues, ever so gently, if I may, Mr Crosbie. No, it's not that. I mean, I think today that they've entered into this debate with a degree of consensus. I think some of them are obviously, and I thought the Honourable Gentleman's speech was very thoughtful again and well delivered. But this is a big test for them tonight. Big test. This is the devolution settlement that is up for stake here. These are critical issues and decisions that we're going to take. Now, they can believe the front bench, and I don't know what reassurances they've got that this is going to be resolved. I mean, I've worked with Scottish Government colleagues. They've told me progress is being made, but nothing is decided. Now, the best way to get progress, to ensure that we could get total focus from government ministers tonight, is to vote for these amendments, because that will tell them quite clearly that all of us across this House say that something has to be done. I was going to start to wind up, but I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman one last time.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and I just want to be absolutely clear about this clause, because it says quite clearly Ministers of the Crown shall only create UK-wide frameworks if they have consulted with and secured the agreement of the affected devolved administrations. It's very, very clear. I agree with the honourable gentleman we should be working cross-party as much as possible, but there really isn't a need to split hairs. That is very, very clear.
I don't know what part of that line the honourable gentleman doesn't understand. Ministers of the Crown shall only create UK frameworks. It's not talking about anybody else. It's not talking about... And I'm going to leave that there. UK Ministers of the Crown shall create UK frameworks. So, well, maybe just leave that. But it's unfortunate. I don't know why they couldn't have come to us, had a discussion and conversation about it. We could have put forward our concerns, and then we maybe consensually, as we've been doing quite a lot, come together and work something out. But unfortunately, that wasn't an approach that the Labour bench wanted to adopt, and that's up to them. But back to my friends in the Scottish Conservative Party. I feel like I'm neglecting them now. You know, this is a test for them this evening. You vote the future and the principles of the devolution settlement are up for grabs this evening. You either trust these guys here, trustworthy though they may be, that they will do the right thing, and they may have received some sort of assurances that they're going to do all these things and everything's going to be all right. What is not acceptable, and I know most of my Scottish Conservative colleagues and friends are new to this place, is for this to go to the unelected House of Lords. For it to be amended. This is what increasingly this government's doing. It doesn't like to amend and accept amendments in this place, which I actually find is a democratic outrage. I think this House, the House where we are all here, elected by our constituents, should be the exclusive place where these things are resolved and fixed out. To put it to a place where as unelected donors and cronies and failed members of Parliament, like the guy that opposed me in Scottish Parliament, who managed to get himself down there and a role in his legislature. Now, if that's what they think is the place where these really, really important issues should be resolved, that's their view. It's not mine. And I think we owe it to our constituents when we have these conversations and debates about critical issues such as this. It's us that decide and determine that, and it shouldn't be left to another place which is unelected. But I hope they're right, you know. And I'm looking round, and I'm seeing that they've got full confidence that this can be done and that this will be resolved and fixed out. But the one way that you could definitely guarantee and ensure you get your way is to vote. That's what we do in this House. You vote on issues that you agree and support. And if the only way we're going to get this thing, so for the sake of the devolution settlement, for the ensuring that we get some sort of solution to everything we need to agree to get fixed, back us tonight, stand up for Scotland and make sure that these amendments pass.
John Lamont.